Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Catherine Raven to discuss Fox and I, An Uncommon Friendship, published by our friends Cindy Spiegel and Julie Grau as their first title on the new Spiegel and Grau inaugural list. Congratulations. Catherine Raven received her PhD in biology from Montana State University and is a former National Park Ranger at Glacier, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Voyageurs, and Yellowstone National Parks. Her natural history essays have appeared in American Scientist, Journal of American Mensa, and Montana Magazine. She is currently a professor at South University in Savannah, Georgia. To moderate tonight's conversation, we're joined by Bethanne Patrick. Bethanne is a freelance literary critic whose work appears frequently in the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Boston Globe, on NPR Books, and many others. She's first VP and Programs Committee Chair of the Penn Faulkner Foundation and a board member of 1455 Literary Arts. She has authored 2 books for National Geographic and edited an anthology, The Books That Changed My Life. She lives in Northern Virginia with her family and too many books. We can relate. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of Fox and I from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Welcome, Catherine. Welcome, Bethanne. So nice to see you.
So excited to be here. Catherine, here is the galley of Fox and I. It's just so beautiful. I have the finished copy as well, somewhere in my house, in these bookshelves behind me. But I'm thrilled to be here tonight to speak to you about Fox and I, which I have told people in the Washington Post should be the one book that they read this summer. So I am definitely a fan, and I definitely want to convince everyone watching tonight that they should be reading Fox and I as well. Thank you so much for joining us here via Zoom with Books and Books.
Wow, I'm just so impressed that you are willing to give me your time, and I'm super impressed with you and thrilled to be here.
Thank you. And I know there's so many things we're going to get to, and we have so much to discuss. But when it comes to a title like Fox and I, An Uncommon Friendship, Catherine, we have to ask, who is Fox and how did you meet him? And so I know you have a very brief passage to read that will answer this question. Well, maybe not answer it, but at least give us a little taste. Would you?
He'll give you a little taste.
Thank you.
He is actually my best friend, and I will read. And I know when I say that, you realize that he was probably my only friend, because generally, if your best friend is a fox, it's probably your only friend. This is from chapter 6, I think. I sat on the wooden steps, my toes playing with soft fringed sagebrush. A fly was clinging to my fresh knee scab, sucking blood with its filthy little mouth. Blowing on it steadily, I sent it airborne. It took only a few reconnaissance laps before striking back at the scab. I blew, it buzzed, and the taunting continued. I became less interested in dislodging the fly than in watching it. Time fell away, and I magnified my focus on the ugly creature sitting on its haunches, rubbing its hands and strobing its head. He was less than 2 meters away when I saw him. He was crouching down and swaying like a serpent, each curve of his tubular body seeming to push him closer to the fly on my knee. I wondered if he could see me at all while he stared so precisely at the housefly. Stopping within a length of my arm, he rolled his eyes up to meet mine. The tip of a mouse tail clung to his upper left lip. Fox! He tilted his nose down toward my knee, exposing a sleek muzzle and leaving us eye to eye. I saw nothing but a fly and two amber eyes. Fox! I hissed, extending the final S until I needed to inhale. Fox! Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I love that moment. I love the extended S's. I love that you immediately tried to communicate with Fox. And here's why. People who read this book will learn that it has been proven by an amazing Russian scientist that, like dogs, foxes can actually distinguish between the sounds humans make. They still don't speak our language, don't understand our words, but they can tell the difference between a S and an L or whatever, type of sounds we make. And so somehow you knew on this first encounter that there was a reason to emphasize S. And it's such an instinctual move that I'm wondering, did you even know what you were doing at the time?
It was instinct. You're correct. It was absolutely instinct. And you would think that an instinct, when there's an animal with 42 sharp teeth, and because I've taught animal physiology, I can just know that he has 42 sharp teeth. I mean, I just know how many teeth foxes have. And so I knew that. And I seen him and other foxes just take a mouse and a vole and go like this with one bite, and it just severs it in half. Mm-hmm. So you think, plus his long claws, you'd think the instinct would be for me to jerk back because here he was close enough to do damage, but his eyes were so friendly. They were so round and wet and just concave, and he was just so kind looking, and there was no instinct to jerk back, only to just say Fox, and to lure him towards me and let him know that I was friend, not foe. And he must have known because he didn't jerk back either. We stared at each other for a very long time.
There are so many scenes in this book that are remarkable, and some that I will discuss and some that I'll leave for readers to discover because no spoilers, of course. But there is a remarkable scene not long after that initial one where you and Fox, literally, you're moving back 2 inches, he moves forward 2 inches. You move back a little bit more, he moves forward a little bit more. And I am not misgendering this fox. I just want to say for the audience, this is a foxhound. This is a male fox. And he really wants connection with you. And here's something about gender that I did think that was interesting. How old were you when this took place?
I was in my 40s when this took place.
Because I noticed you call yourself as a figure, the girl to the fox.
Yeah.
The fox.
That is really, yes. I do think that's interesting. That's a whole nother, it's a whole nother essay, I guess. And I really don't know why. It does not seem natural to me at all to refer to myself as a lady or a woman. And I'm not sure. And I'm really attentive to that in other books when the word girl is used and when woman, and I don't know. Of course, for my size, he would have seen me as a small human. So of course it would be girl to him and not anything else. But even as I see myself, and then also I refer to myself in the book a lot as he, which seems very natural to me, but I learned that grammatically that's not how we do things anymore. We
Right.
do the he and the she and the this and that. So that's fine to mix things up. But I got so used to when you see yourself in a generic form, it's he. And so, I mean, that's
Yes.
how we learned to write English so long ago.
That is such an interesting thing, because where I was going with that is that it seems to me a fox would see, unless you were so elderly and frail, would see any human female as a girl in a way. Do you see what I mean? Like that you were an active, your hurricane hands in the book. The fox is someone who's always moving and making gestures and using tools. And so I thought that was fascinating, that to the fox, you might seem so interesting because here you are not having a litter of kits or babies or anything like that, yet you're still very much engaged in work and in activity and in fixing your dwelling and changing things around your dwelling, you know, the blue roofed house where you live. And Fox is so interested. But of course, let's take a hard step back, Catherine. We don't want to, in fact, I want you to read again, but I'm going to take the liberty of reading a little passage here, because you're talking about birds and passerines in particular. This is on page 95, in case you want to look at it. And I love the fact that you say, I did not record the bluebird's shame, the blackbird's pride, or the tanager's inclination to gossip. Cells on the graph paper accommodated numbers, not words. I reduced each creature to a concise check mark on a chart. If you looked at birds any other way, if you failed to objectify them and instead saw twittering blue sparks infusing a juniper until it quivered like a propane pilot light, well then, you would be imagining things that were not happening. Bluebirds and robins gossiping when they were only eating berries from the same shrub, bitchy blackbirds shitting on meadowlarks when they were only suffering from nearsightedness. The purpose of my collations was to prevent my mind from playing tricks on me, because you're a scientist. And so, of course, it must have been really challenging for you to decide to write Fox and I, because it means you are you anthropomorphizing Fox in this book?
I changed my idea of anthropomorphizing because of Fox. And while I understand that this is the common paradigm and that's the paradigm, we shouldn't anthropomorphize, but I deny that we really know what anthropomorphize means, because it has to have the assumption behind it that we know which characteristics are human and which ones aren't. If we say that we are imagining that animals have traits that only humans should have, that means we know which traits only humans have. And I don't think we do anymore.
That's fascinating, because in all of your writing, not just about Fox, but in your writing about all of the mammals and birds and other creatures in here, we do see things that correspond to impulses, instincts, traits that humans have. Yeah. There's no question. For instance, this is very silly and personal, but my daughter lives in a city place with an apartment, and it has a little balcony, and a pigeon family, a pigeon laid her eggs in a plant. Oh. And they stayed and they hatched and they became nestlings and then fledglings. And we watched this entire change. And watching those pigeon parents trade off on child rearing was unbelievable to see, because we could watch so close because we were right behind the glass. And there's no question that it was sometimes, look, I've got to get out of this nest. They're driving me crazy with all of their noise. Or we need more food. Could you go and get some? And I don't think that is putting human traits onto animals. That is actually seeing what animals are doing. And so I'm fascinated
Not
that you
silly either. I'm so thrilled that you had that experience. That's not silly. I think it's a really amazing, important thing. People don't notice because they don't take the time, or because you start to see it and then you jerk yourself back and say, no, I'm imagining it, and they're only just pigeons. But after you start, if you see another set of pigeons and another set the next year, you'll start to notice that they're different. And then
Yes.
it will be obvious to you that you're seeing personality, because the pigeons 4 years from now weren't the same as the pigeons this year and next year. And you'll see that they act differently than each other. So they have personalities.
Exactly. They have personalities. And this is not just us imputing human qualities to them. It is us watching them.
Yes.
But again, in this passage I read, I was fascinated because you are able to separate yourself. You're able to be the scientist who marks down the data and collates your findings and doesn't say, oh, today the magpies were having quite a bickering match. So what is it like for you? Because I think so many people are going to read Fox and I and love the fact that you are able to bring so much compassion to animals. And yet there's also part of you that remains a scientist and remains the kind of scientist who is able to say, we have to let nature do what nature does. We don't have to interfere, but we still have to let things happen the way they do happen.
I think that having a deep understanding of science really helps, and not just a superficial understanding. Of course, it's my instinct to I believe that's just something instinctive in me. Doesn't mean everybody can't do it. Everybody can do it. It just might be easier for me to empathize with animals than other people. But everybody can empathize with animals if they try, because it's hard for me to empathize with humans, and I can do it because I've tried and practiced. So everybody can do it. But I do want to say more about really understanding science and taking a class in it. I think you've probably guessed from the book that I kind of have a crush on Darwin. I mean,
yes,
people think he was just some guy that went off on this boat, but he was already the most amazing naturalist. That's why he was chosen.
Exactly.
Most all of the seminal work in the world today that's done on earthworms was done by Charles Darwin. He's the one that taught us, as you know from the book, that plants move around to face the sun. He did so many amazing things, and I have read, I think, everything that he's written, and I've studied the garden that he had in his house. So I know him as a person, and Gregor Mendel as well. I know the scientists as people, not just a few things that they've written. And of course, a lot of people know the theory of evolution from a textbook, maybe even only a high school textbook. But of course, I've read Darwin's entire book, The Origin of Species, and I just love it. So you see his personality come out in the book, and the things that he worried about and the conjectures that he had. And you understand that the way he saw the world is the same way that I see the world, that science is so spectacularly important as a way of knowing and as a body of knowledge. It's amazing and important, but it just leaves a whole bunch of questions unanswered. And so we need to rely on something else. And I think if people start to delve a little bit more, and I know everybody's limited in their time. I mean, if your main interest is art history, it's going to take a bit to inspire you to pick up The Origin of Species. But it would be nice if more people, I think that's the answer to your question, is how am I able to do this? And it's because I have a doctorate in biology, and because I love biology so much, and I've read so deeply in biology, that I'm able to separate what is science and what information we get from science and what information we're not getting from science. And
and that leads me, I was surprised, especially with your crush on Darwin, which is holy,
Obvious in the
book. Why not? Why not? Fabulous, fabulous man. But at the same time, you never name Fox. You do name some of the other creatures that you never touch. For T-Bone and Torn-tailed. Am I getting that? And things like that. But Fox, with the creature with whom you have the closest relationship, this is your closest friend. You don't call him Charles Darwin. That Fox remains Fox. And I thought that was also really interesting. Was that a way of maintaining an essential otherness?
I tried for such a long time to objectify him and to make him and you notice in the book, he's the Fox for a while, and then he becomes Fox. And because I struggled so much, and by the time I realized he was my best friend, he was Fox, and he was just going to be Fox, even though I think he identified me by what he would have thought was the most important characteristic, which is I have these hands, these big, long fingers, relatively long compared to a fox.
Right, exactly. And one of the things I think also that is going to just charm readers is the fact that you decided to read The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry to Fox. And there are so many reasons for this. And again, I want to leave some of this for people to discover. But it's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful that someone who loved the wild as much as you do, Catherine, wrote this book that allowed you a way of being in stillness with this creature. Allowed you a way to be quiet, but yet also be relating. And as a book person, that art history person, if you will, that literature person who's not reading enough science, and I will remedy that, I thought this is really fascinating to me that you chose to share literature with Fox. That it wasn't, you didn't bring out a book of paintings. You didn't start playing an instrument. You didn't do an interpretive dance. You wanted to read to Fox. Would you talk about that, please?
Yes, and reading worked well because I started talking a little bit about myself and realized that's not really my forte. I don't like talking about myself, even with Fox. Even with anyone. So I had to do something to keep him around. So I decided to pick up a book and read. As I read, and I was this was instinctive and it worked perfectly. I would read and also paraphrase, and paraphrasing allowed me to stare right at him. So I would read the book, look at him, and then I would hold up pictures. So he knew that I was relating to him. The important thing is that I would then stop after a while and I would stare right at him. And in my mind, I would count down to 15, including the 1,000, just as I do with my students when I ask them a question, because I hated all those professors who would ask a question and then a split second later, they give you the answer and they don't wait till you even have time to think. So I waited, and he knew that was his turn. It was his turn, and he kept his eyes right on me. He understood that we were communicating, and it doesn't matter that he doesn't know what I'm saying. He knows that I'm communicating with him. He knows I'm not mad, I'm not angry, that there's just this level of communication. It reminded me so much thinking of Ishmael and his best friend who didn't speak English at all, and that was his best and only friend. I mean, when Ishmael's talking about his will in Moby Dick, he's leaving everything to his best friend, who's a cannibal, who doesn't speak any English at all, really.
Which it means we have to, because here's another place where literature comes into Fox and I. When you're talking about Ishmael and you're thinking about Moby Dick and other characters in literature who have been in a complicated relationship with an animal, and so I know you have a passage about this to share with us, if you don't mind reading that as well, Catherine.
Sure, I will.
Excellent.
Thank you. Now, this is from chapter 2. I was a park ranger before I earned my doctorate in biology. In fact, I was pressing a Stetson on my head and cinching up that iconic pinecone embossed belt before I finished my bachelor's degree. I'd studied botany and zoology in college. In Washington's Mount Rainier National Park, I patrolled the backcountry. My trail circuit included a region known as Three Lakes, where I stayed in a tiny cabin that smelled like wood and wax. A few feet shorter than my blue-roofed cottage, the Three Lakes patrol cabin and its outhouse perched on a knoll above First Lake, the largest of the Three Lakes. Giant, shaggy-barked evergreens surrounded and almost completely shaded the lake. I never called it First Lake. I treated all 3 lakes as a single body of water, temporarily separated by a transient meadow, and called it all 3 lakes, no matter which shore I stood on. Not many hikers trudged the 6 miles uphill to 3 lakes from the nearest road. Even fewer came by way of the Pacific Crest Trail, a long journey that required camping overnight. Every morning, I rose from a sleeping deck that ran flush with the cabin's window and scratched myself into a uniform, one badge on the shirt and another on the jacket. Wearing a .357 in a shoulder holster, I hiked down to the lake with coffee in one hand and a government-issued logbook in the other. Across my green cloth logbook, in fat black cursive, I had written a quote from Ishmael, the narrator of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. Meditation and water are wedded forever. For Ishmael, an impecunious sailor hustling jobs in Manhattan in the 1800s, meditation meant exactly what it meant to me at the Three Lakes cabin in the 20th century, pondering. If it had any other meaning, scholastic, formal, or religious, I wasn't any more aware of it than Ishmael would have been. Overall, our lot and luck didn't differ by much. We both found ways to keep wild animals and wild water nearby. Melville could have dropped Ishmael along the Shriner Peak Trail and let him join me on the 8-mile hike up the exposed ridge to the fire lookout. After surveying wildlife and hammering PVC pipes into snowbanks, we would haul jerry cans filled with meltwater back to the fire tower. In the evening, we would stand on the tower's railed balcony to admire our priceless view of Mount Rainier. And never mind the 1,000 miles or the 150 years that separated us, the same thought would cross our minds. An 8-mile hike, no better view in the Northwest, asked less of a person. After a night at the lookout, we would follow Laughing Water Creek through old-growth forest, using Leatherman tools and pruning paint to repair graffiti that the scalawags had carved into the thin gray bark of silver firs. Laughing Water Creek traces the park's boundary around the rim of the Three Lakes Basin, so we would have to check on boundary signs. Pausing periodically at the white metal signs with green embossed letters, one of us would slip the reverse end of a claw hammer under a double-headed nail, pulling just enough to prevent the sign from eating into the bark of a boundary tree. We wouldn't mind the workload. We were outdoors, away from civilization, and free from anxiety. An impecunious sailor in Manhattan in 1800 expressed anxiety by deliberately stepping into the streets and methodically knocking people's hats off. To a backcountry ranger in the 20th century, anxiety meant turning into mercury, a metal that evaporates in ambient temperatures, becomes invisible, odorless, completely unassuming. Disappearing into the woods saved me from questions that caused anxiety. Thank you for asking me to read that. He is
Thank
one of my
you.
favorite narrators in literature. What would we do without Ishmael?
What would we do without Ishmael? I don't know. He defines so much for so many of us about what American literature means, about what a narrator means, about what an unreliable narrator means. It's just, there's a ton there. But what is also there is you as a narrator. And one of the things, there's a lot we could unpack and a lot we could talk about. But before I get to your personal history and some of the hardships that you have gone through and that led you to this particular life, one of the things I noticed in the passage is something I spoke to you about in the green room earlier, which is that for you, both in your life as a ranger and in your life in the blue roofed house with Fox as your best friend, time works differently. And you talked about the fact that, you have these objects in your home that are so old, billions of years, tens of thousands of years old. And so for someone in your field, someone who does biology and who understands really ancient places in the earth, a few minutes, a few hours, 135 yards of driveway, these things don't mean the same amount as they do to someone living in a more busy urban place. So talk to me about how time works for Catherine Raven.
Time is definitely influenced by my physical setting and also by literature. But we'll talk mostly about the physical setting because I think in the passage that I read, you can see the way that because I have so many friends that are actually literary figures, including Victor Frankenstein, because they're in and out of my mind all the time. Well, Victor was in my mind all the time when I was in graduate school. And because they actually live 100 years, or in Ishmael's case, 150 years before me, time just doesn't really matter that much. I mean, that's what literature does. When we read books and feel close to characters, even St. X himself, of course, his memoir, Wind, Sand, and Stars. And so when you become close to these literary figures, what they're doing is taking you outside of your physical location and outside of your time. And that goes back hundreds of years. But my setting, my love of natural history and geology, and you really can't study biology without studying geology, because the animals and the plants that live here are here because of the rocks and the soil. I have a very different sense of time. I mean, evolutionary time is millions of years, but I have a boulder that I sit on my property that's Precambrian. I have horse's teeth on my stairs here that are stairwell, 40 million years old from the Miocene. And so you start to think not even in hundreds of years, but you start to think of time. Well, I live in on an edge of the largest contiguous petrified forest in North America. I know there's a place in Arizona called the Petrified Forest National Park, and you should go there. But even though that's a national park called Petrified Forest, the largest contiguous petrified forest is here in Yellowstone. It starts, if you can imagine Yellowstone Park as kind of this big square of 2 million acres. The Petrified Forest, the northern part of Yellowstone, runs from beyond the eastern boundary of the park all the way through the park and past the western boundary of the park. I'm on the western boundary here. And so there's actually buried in my backyard here, a petrified tree. And there's parts of petrified trees all over the place. So you do get a different sense of time when you start to think about a rock band here that's 2 billion years old. There aren't very many places in the world where you can find a 2 billion year old rock band. I think there's only 3 places. And this narrow area just north of Yellowstone is also one of those places where we have 2 billion years old rocks. So almost as old as our planet itself. And living with this sense of time as just human lives are just so, our lifespans are so immaterial. We're all just a blink of an eye. That's necessary for me because I worried so much at one time about giving so much emotional investment to an animal that didn't live very long. And then at some point you realize that time, whether an animal lives for 4 years or 40 years, what does it matter when the earth is 2 billion years old? Nothing.
Whatever that time is its own. It's complete, isn't it? It's a very, very special thing. And I'm thinking about the boulder in your backyard and its age and how much you love it. And the scene where Fox luxuriously stretches himself over it and grips it with his longest, I guess you would call it a toe. And it was such a wonderful visual moment. And it also made me think, since we're talking about time, what did you learn about time from Fox? You've already described the way you connected and how you would wait 15 seconds and the communication that took place. But I think as much as the two of you communicated, you learned things from Fox as well.
That's right. And I came to understand that as pets are one particular type of relationship people have with animals, and Fox is a wild animal, and people might become more like their pets. I think a lot of people do become more like their pets. I sense that I was becoming more like Fox, more like a wild animal.
Yeah.
I learned a lot about time from reacquainting myself, or maybe just even giving myself permission to be more wild. You asked me about anthropomorphism, so I'll get off the track for a minute or two here. And we talked about anthropomorphism as being the idea that we are imposing human characteristics on an animal, and we are a little bit afraid of thinking about animals acting like people. But the reverse anthropomorphism, I think we worry about even more, which is people acting like animals, acting like wild animals.
Yes.
And
true.
I definitely became more like Fox, or gave myself permission to be more like Fox. I hope that is one of the things people take away from this book, is to get more in touch, not just anthropomorphism, not just to open up their ideas about anthropomorphism, but to realize that the reverse image is so important too, that not only are they more like us, but we're more like them. And so time, all wild animals, you realize that their sense of time is different than ours.
Yes.
They're short-lived. And we seem to think of ourselves, when maybe we're in our 20s, we seem to think we have these long lives. But when you're thinking of yourself as a wild animal, instinctively, I think you sense that your life is short. That no matter how long you're going to be on this planet, humans just aren't going to live much more than 100, 110. That's nothing. Our lives are very short. Fox knows that instinctively. And that's one of the important things I learned about time from him, is really the value of time, the importance of time to a short-lived animal. And we're short-lived animals. We just don't all.
We are. We just don't want. We don't want to admit it. And there's one scene where Fox, because you do write certain passages wholly from Fox's perspective, where Fox goes by a much older foxhound who is thinking, why are you rushing around like this? I'm just going to sort of settle down into this nice, little place where I have, because this particular foxhound is older and even has more of a sense of, maybe not so much that time is running out, because that would be anthropomorphizing too much, but definitely that when you get a nice situation, stay with it for as long as you can.
So you're feeling more comfortable with yourself as wild. Someone asked me last night what I thought of wild, and I think that that comes out in the book, that it's a state that we're in when we throw off the ideas or the fetters of human culture, which is very transient itself and isn't wild and isn't natural. And we get in touch with, maybe you would call it instinct, and you start to use your instinct more. And you understand how Fox, and you see what Fox is doing. It seems like he's very wise because he's in touch with what makes sense, and we're not always, because we have culture blocking, telling us to do things. I guess that's one of the themes of the book. When I'm trying to figure out what to do with my life, you've probably been there yourself, and you're trying to figure out, well, I know you have, because you've written so many books and you've been thinking, well, I just read some of your, I know you have, because I just read
No, but I know what you're saying.
So I know you think about what should I do and where should I go, and
Yes.
these questions that you have. And if you thought of them more in the sense of a wild animal, what is your optimum habit and what is your optimum habitat? I think you would find that would help. That would show you the way a lot easier.
It has. In fact, that's funny because I was talking with someone earlier today about that, about the point you get to in life. And I think everyone arrives here sometimes later, sometimes sooner, where you realize that you are doing things because they come naturally to you. And you're not forcing things that are better for someone else, or, because you've been told to do them. And that is another important message in Fox and I, because that there are things about human culture that are difficult for you. They're difficult because of your background. They're difficult because of your temperament. And you make this beautiful place for yourself, and not just the actual place, but the atmosphere, the rhythms, the cycles that you decide to inhabit. And that is really impressive. And I'm not trying to get away from Fox, because I think, again, to go back to my last question, you learned so much from Fox. And I thought that the contrast between your life outside of your home, of your cabin, whatever word is best to describe it, and inside is so fascinating, because you have this beautifully curated interior. There's one room that you describe in the rainbow room, and then there's another room where you sort of took inspiration from one of the Yellowstone Lodge and brought these beautiful yellows and pinks and greens. And I thought, you have a very highly cultivated aesthetic sense. And one of the things that comes through in Fox and I is how that sense can find things in any sort of atmosphere. You don't have to be in a mountainous region or a desert, or where you can be in scrubland and still find beauty. And so I wanted to ask you to comment on that, to comment on a fox is beautiful, even with mange, but poor fox. But there are other things that are so beautiful, and that your eye, trained by science, is able to notice and then bring human attributes and grace to.
I hope that people reading this book will be able to take that away, because I know that some people can't live in the country. Not that it's financially impossible or physically impossible, but that's not what's inside them. You're either a city person or a country person, or trying to decide. People will vacation in a beautiful spot, or they'll live in a beautiful spot like this, but their real home, where they're comfortable, might be a place where there's more buildings around them. There's still beauty there. You can't force yourself to live in a place on a lake or on an ocean, even if you love being there a week or two or something out of the year. But I do want people to understand that nature is wherever they are, that they can find some beauty and some nature wherever they are and cultivate that aesthetic. But also, since you brought up aesthetics, didn't you think that's getting back to anthropomorphism? I thought that Fox had a sense of aesthetics too. When I went up to his den, I was amazed at the things that he collected that had no actual use, and bones that couldn't have been from animals that he killed. I know he didn't kill an elk.
We're going to have to go to the questions now, because if we talk too much about that, I am actually going to cry. That tells you that is an amazing scene. It's true. Fox has an aesthetic sense, and other animals do as well. Yes. Someone, I just want to say, Sarah Ashby says, started reading it yesterday and I love it. I wanted to share that with you. She also says, why would anthropomorphizing be wrong? Aren't we just trying to understand animals the way they try to understand us? We just have a fancy human word for it.
Well, it's unfortunate that we have a fancy human word. Because of that fancy word, it does lend itself to pedantics a lot. So that's a problem. A lot of people that understand science in a very cursory way. I don't believe that the scientific community is behind today's ideas of anthropomorphism, but probably 10 years ago, more so. I think as we were right on the cusp of this as I was writing the book. And so now I do think there's more people in the scientific community who are saying, yes, we do see animals with personalities, but it's still a paradigm. And as you see in the book, the problem with paradigms like Oobleck, we don't know where it comes from, and it's sticky and we can't get rid of it. And so I can't tell you why it's the paradigm, and it takes a whole social movement to
change it.
Get rid of the paradigm about anthropomorphism. And as soon as we get rid of that, I'm going to come and chase you down about reverse anthropomorphism and say, okay, we've made one step, but now we need to get back in touch with the fact that we need to make ourselves a little bit more wild. Now that we've respected animals as being a little bit more human, let's start letting ourselves be a little bit more wild.
I love that. That's got to be, let's let ourselves be a little bit more wild. Catherine Raven, people. Joanne Schweitzer says, we had a fox visit us occasionally for about a year. Slinky stopped showing up after that year. We live in a suburban area. What's the average lifespan of a fox in that environment?
4 would be terrific. So, 2.5 or 3. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate. I don't know what state you're in. In Montana, the number one cause of death of the little ones, the kits, is feral cats. I know there's a lot of cat lovers out there, but I have to say it. I have to be honest. It's cats. It's not the muffy cat that lives on your sofa and that goes outside with a bell on it. Foxes aren't stupid. If you put a bell on it, they will be able to escape.
Right.
And even if you think you're feeding it a lot, it might be a problem. But I'm talking about feral cats, and that means ones that you're not feeding. Nobody's feeding them. They are little monster hunting machines. They're cats that people just let outside because they decided to go on vacation to Europe, and where are we going to leave our cat? So we just drive it out to the country and tell the kids, be happy. People just drop their cats off and they become feral. So those are the ones that are killing foxes, and it's a big problem. But I just published, well, I didn't publish it, but one of my essays is just published in the United Kingdom, and I can't remember it just was published yesterday, but you can Google it. Another cause of death that I want you to know about in cities, and it's explained in that essay, garbage eating. And I wrote it in response to a lovely and really nicely written essay by someone in the UK that had a really good heart and thought that what we should do to increase the population of urban foxes is to let them eat garbage. And I know he meant well, but I had to explain that garbage is killing foxes. I mean, they die from chocolate. Believe it. We don't. So you guys eat all the chocolate you want.
Right. But no good for foxes. Oh boy.
Chocolate, but don't give fox chocolate. And also, their bodies aren't made to eat grains. So if they get into it doesn't mean, but they don't know that. So
of course,
they're eating your pizza crusts and things like that, and pasta, and that is bringing them to a speedy death. So that's where your urban or suburban foxes are going, to the feral cats and to the
wow.
garbage.
So I'm so proud now. I'm so proud now, Catherine, that this spring we had a fox den underneath our screen porch, and I absolutely refuse to let anyone do anything about it to scare them out, because I wanted to wait until the kits were old enough to be on their own, and we wouldn't be flushing them out into a world of feral cats and garbage and things like that. So I am Team Fox.
Yes, absolutely
wonderful, says Russ. I couldn't put it down. I was fortunate to meet Dr. Raven a few years ago, and I was delighted to learn of this book. Reading my mind, she just answered my question about reverse anthropomorphism. I wonder if Dr. Raven has any regrets regarding her time spent with Fox, and not spending time with Fox, but missed opportunities that you might have had.
Yes, I'm not going to spoil the book, but I don't want you to think I'm a wonderful, great person, and because I'm not. I did something really bad I learned a lot about friendship from him and tried to be, I thought, a great friend, and I thought I was there, but then so the book is kind of a tragicomedy, I have to tell you. I made a big mistake at the end. I did something that I regretted, and I wish my time with Fox was longer so I could make it up to him. For sure. Yeah, I wish I could make up the mistake that I made.
I'm gonna cry again. This is not.
I know.
Everyone, this is such
I did a bad thing.
Such a beautiful book, and it's not. It is. It's. I don't know how to explain it. This is not an easy, sentimental book about animals and our wild selves. This is truly a meaningful read. And with that, Books and Books actually has a question about the process, about how long it took you to write the book and the challenges that it involved for you. So how long did it take, Catherine?
It seems like it took forever, but remember, I was working full-time as a university professor, which is not really an hourly kind of a 40-hour
job. No, it's not.
They call you and they need your help on a Sunday, and you give it to them. And of course, obviously, they're also going to fail when they bother you on a Sunday, but still you answer them on a Sunday. Right. What can you do? So you're with them all the time. And then on a lot of my vacation time from the university, professors do get vacations, but I spent a lot of my vacation time in Yellowstone Park guiding for the University of Montana. And I love doing that too. So, but also I didn't really have any writing experience or training. So that took a long time as well. The sections about the fox were really easy for me to write, but I read a lot and I just happen to love that really close third person. Hilary Mantel was, I forget when Wolf Hall came out, but I love, that tight third person. Mm-hmm. And so it was easy for me to write that way. And it's easy for me to write the fox and the animal points of view. And then putting my story in was not that hard once I realized that my story would fit in. I didn't really have to, it didn't take really any time to think about how to put it in. It was just the actual act of writing itself. I simply took the friendship was transformative. It's obviously transgressive, but it was transformative. So I simply said, how did he transform me? And then where did I start from and my path? So the arc was pretty natural to write as well, but it was just a matter of time and learning how to write, the mechanics of writing. And what took the longest was fussing with the first person and the third person and the past tense and the present tense, which voices I want to use, and how to make it obvious to the reader when I was switching back and forth. It's so automatic for me to see the world from the point of view of animals, ants, and birds. It's just so automatic to me, but it's not so automatic to other people. And you want to make sure your readers don't think that you're a crazy person. With,
Not a crazy person.
And the ants.
There was one passage with the ants where I really wasn't sure who was narrating. And then when you realize it's ants, it's wonderful. It's absolutely amazing. And you think, and then the descriptions of things that some of us have never seen, like wolf's milk.
Wolf milk slime.
Yes.
That was a wonderful mushroom.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to know. It's almost as if we're seeing them both through Catherine Raven's eyes, but also through a wild creature's eyes. And that, I think, is a real trick to pull off. And I give you a lot of kudos for that, because it didn't seem as if, here is a scientist come to explain something to us. It seemed as if this is just part and parcel of the world that you've immersed yourself in. And I would be remiss. I know we only have a few minutes left. I just want people to know you have a few more minutes if you've got a question for Catherine. But if I didn't ask about what is coming next, I know everyone would be disappointed. And in the green room, you were mentioning that there is a fox with a skunk with little skunk. What are they? Skunklets?
Skunklings, but you can call them skunklets if you want to. I call them skunklings.
And I thought, this is interesting. Are we going to see Skunk and I coming next? I'm kidding.
I am working on a novel, but I had to, which I love, and I love the characters so much. And it's called The Owls of Sybil Springs, and it takes place in the Pacific Northwest in the 1980s, because that 88 to 89, because that's the year of the spotted owls, the year of the Wilderness Act, the Yellowstone fires. So it's relatively modern. And the character, and of course it's a third person. The main character, the protagonist, is a young girl in her early 20s, and she's on the autism spectrum, and she is running up to Canada to escape something, and her car breaks down, so she ends up in this small town in the Northwest. And my main characters are all staying at this whorehouse, which was there during the heyday of the logging industry. But of course, in the 1988-89, the logging industry is collapsing rapidly because of the spotted owl crisis. So the woman who's running the whorehouse turns it into a flower farm, and they're raising peonies and such, and all the characters are living on the flower farm. And it is a mystery. And so the skunklings, I decided, because I love them so much and had so many great times watching the skunklings, there are skunklings on the flower farm. That's right.
Owls and skunklings and peonies. This is right up my alley. This sounds wonderful. Do you know when we might see it?
I don't, but
we won't get you in trouble with your wonderful publisher, Spiegel and Grau. We're looking forward to The Owls of Sybil Springs. And I know we are almost at the end. I don't see any other questions. So Books and Books, is it time for you to take it away again?
It is. I just want to thank you both. Oh my gosh. I loved what you said, Catherine. Well, the entire conversation is fascinating, but it was so interesting to hear about literary friends and how they become your friends, and what a big part of your life literature can actually play. That is just like obviously right up my alley. So thank you so much for sharing this evening with us. I think we might have gotten one more question down here. Let's see.
I can't.
Or maybe just a comment.
That's right. I'm just pulling down quickly. Joanne Schweitzer says Slinky used to leave food caches around our yard. Was this a friendly gesture, or did that mean he was simply comfortable with that area? He would leave them and never consume them.
Yeah, he was being prudent. He was being prudent. He wasn't going to just eat everything and make himself overweight because they're fleet so that they can run and leap. And they bury things and sometimes never get back to them if they don't need them. I'm still finding eggs that Fox buried on my property.
Fox is unforgettable, and Catherine, so are you as an interview and an author. Thank you so much.
We love Fox at Books and Books. And I just want to remind everyone watching that if you don't have a copy already, you can just press the green button at the bottom of the screen. We'll ship it right off to you. You can come to any of our stores and we have it there as well. And just thank you again for joining us in our virtual bookshop. And I hope to see you in person someday soon. And just wishing everyone well and thanking everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.